Today, I am so happy to be able to thank some more patrons of this show who have donated $5 to $10 a month to support this podcast. I cannot tell you how much this means to me. Honestly, there is so much work that goes into this. And if I knew how much work this was going to be, I probably wouldn't have started in the first place. But I am so glad I did. And I am so unbelievably grateful to all of you for sponsoring this show. So to the following people: Emma Galloway, Catherine Vierhuis, Dave and Jasmine Tran, Brenda Tobin, Deanne Scott, and Paige Burling McKenzie. Thank you with all my heart. Your support means the world to me, and it really helps me to continue producing more episodes. So, today we speak with homeopath Jonathan Stallick, who has been practicing homeopathy for over 35 years. He's helped thousands of patients to better health and happiness, and he's lectured on homeopathy to professionals all over the world. If you're a homeopath listening, be sure to check out Jonathan's lectures on his website, jonathanstallick.com, or check the show notes for the link. He is an incredible lecturer, and I know you're going to love learning from him. He's always doing lectures on new and interesting remedies that you've probably never heard of and presenting cases from his clinic, and it will really challenge you and expand your thinking and grow you as a homeopath. So, quick warning, if you have little kiddies listening to this episode with you, the word SHIT is used several times in this episode, so you may want to skip this one for a time when they are not around you, but you are going to love this episode. It was so fun to do, and Jonathan is really a great character. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now my mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Hello, homies, and a very warm welcome to Homeopathy Hangout. Today, we get to chat with a lovely Jonathan Stallick, all the way from England. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey, Eugenie. Is it Eugenie? Or
Eugenie.
Eugenie. Okay.
Wow. It's, if you want to go the French, it's actually Eugenie, but in Australia, in Australia, they bastardize everyone's name. So Eugenie. Here I am, Eugenie.
Eugenie.
Exactly. Well, it's so lovely to have you on today. I've had a few of your buddies on, including the lovely Hilary Dorian. So, it's just wonderful to have you on today as well. I'm so excited. Can you tell us, Jonathan, you've been practicing for over 35 years, but how were you first introduced to homeopathy?
So homeopathy was just a word that I'd heard. I think my mum had a friend that went to a homeopath, and so it was just a word. And I went through a pretty difficult time. I was getting, this was back in the 80s, and I was getting anxiety attacks. I'd sort of come out of college, and my sister had died, and there was a few things that were sort of really bothering me, but I was all bottled up like a good growing guy. We just bottle everything up, and was getting sort of panic attacks. And I just thought I didn't want to go down the route of conventional, antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills. And so I just thought, oh, well, try homeopathy. It's a word, natural. And I went to see a nice Indian gentleman in London, and the remedies seemed to work. And then I started reading about it, and it was like one of those moments, like one of those seminal moments. That's a good word, seminal moments, when you think, it just hit me between the eyes. Oh my God, I've got to know more about this. This is just, it's like something I'd never really, there's a whole world. Homeopathy is like a world that I'd never come across before, really. And it just sort of just struck me that I've got to find out more about this, and was kind of hooked from that point on, and started just treating friends and family with sort of first aid stuff, and started seeing results. And then just thought, at the time I was a professional musician. Oh. So I was the cellist and was, playing and teaching. Mm-hmm. And so then it was a big decision whether to switch. I just had this feeling that homeopathy was supposed to be part of my life. And so I switched. I actually went to college in London. I found a homeopathy college, and then sort of gradually gave up the music and went over to homeopathy. So that was the way it started.
Amazing. Do you still play cello?
I do.
It's a beautiful instrument. I love it.
It is. Yeah, it is. Although I'm actually trying to sell it at the moment. It's funny, actually. Just before COVID struck, I hadn't had the cello for about 8 years. And I just had this feeling that I wanted to reconnect with that. I just felt really strong about it. So I had some money and I thought I'll buy a cello, and I did. And then COVID came on. I was so pleased that I had something to really focus on, in those times when during lockdown, it was a real, so I thought, wow, I must have had some kind of instinct about it. So
Absolutely.
cello is great.
Yeah, and music is so good for everything.
It really is.
I played piano for a few years, and it's just, I can't imagine not having some sort of musical instrument to help you along. Now, in the 1990s, you spent a few years treating hundreds of patients with HIV/AIDS, and you wrote a book about it called AIDS, the Homeopathic Challenge. That's got to tell us more.
So this was back in 1990, AIDS. You've got to realize at that time, or you probably maybe remember, or you maybe don't, I don't know, but at that time, it was probably like COVID was in the early days. People were terrified of it. And even in the homeopathic community, very few people really wanted to touch it because it seemed such a massive undertaking. I'd made connection with a homeopath called Mike Strange, who was practicing in South London, and I worked with him, and he was seeing a lot of HIV and AIDS patients. So there was that connection. And then a friend of mine was going to visit one of the HIV and AIDS centres for people with HIV in London. And she said, why don't you come along? And at the time, I'd kind of given up homeopathy for a little while. I'd burnt out a little bit and I was doing other stuff. So I thought, well, it wouldn't hurt. I thought I'll go along, have a look. It'd be quite interesting, I'm sure. Went along and I was kind of said, I thought I could do a talk on homeopathy. That's all I was going to do. I didn't want to see any patients. But I could give a talk on it. So I gave this talk. They were very pleased to welcome me to do this talk, and I did that, and they loved it. And the guy who ran the centre said, "Look, would you come and work here as a homeopath?" And I went, "No, no, thank you very much. It's too much." And he said, "Look, come on, just try it out for a few weeks, see how you get on. There's no obligation. If you don't like it, then no problem." And then I just kind of thought, okay, just jump in the deep end, and started seeing some really good results. And I was really encouraged and inspired, and just thought, oh yeah, this is really interesting. Yeah, that's how it started. And so I worked at two centres in London. One of them, which is the main centre called London Lighthouse, which was pretty pioneering at the time. I mean, it was a beautiful building in West London, and had all the facilities. It had a beautiful sort of lecture hall and a sort of restaurant, sort of cafe, and not a hospice, but a residential unit on the top floor where people could go and rest. And they had nurses, full-time nurses, and they had all the alternative therapies. So they had, massage, they had hypnotherapy. It was a really kind of great opportunity for sort of alternative medicine to come into its own. And homeopathy, they wanted a homeopath, and I was there at the right time. And I was recruited to work. I worked there like a whole day, 1 day a week. And they bought me a whole pharmacy of remedies. Like I had a cupboard, they had loads of money at the time. And I just was able to buy any remedy I wanted. So I had a huge pharmacy, which was fantastic. And and was seeing, and I saw about over 500 patients with HIV and AIDS. And wow, it was really interesting. It was a way of really understanding. I mean, I think the public had a perception of HIV and AIDS through media, but this was a way to really understand the battlefront, if you like, to see what are these people really going through and what is really going on. And it sort of taught me a lot. I'll give you an example of something it taught me. For example, I said to one guy who I was treating, I said, look, okay, so supposing I was able to give you a remedy or a tablet that could completely get rid of the HIV, make you completely without HIV, how would you feel about that? And I thought that's a fairly sort of straightforward question. You think he might jump at the chance. No, he said, I'm not sure. He said, because, I've got my life all set up. I've got my friends. I'm getting housing benefit. I'm getting an income from the government. So see, there were some things that, it wasn't all, these people weren't all victims of some terrible disease. There was something else going on as well. So anyway, there were some various things like that it sort of taught me as well. But I did have, I had some really good results. I'll tell you, my first patient I saw, my first HIV patient, because this sticks in my mind. So he came along and he had this sort of, it's in my book, but he'd had everything. He'd had bowel cancer. He'd had loads of STDs, so gonorrhea, syphilis. He had kidney failure. He'd had, I don't know, I can't remember everything, but he'd been vaccinated to the hilt. And then he had an operation for bowel cancer. And when he turned up to see me, he could hardly sit down because they'd operated through his rectum and had cut the rectum, and he was in terrible pain, really pain. And they'd given him like a couple of months to live, basically. He was, he'd lost a lot of weight. So I just kind of thought, okay. And I gave him a number of remedies. And at the time, I was giving multiple remedies. I felt that at the time that AIDS and HIV needed perhaps a different approach. And I would give people, maybe a series of different nosodes, for example. I would identify different layers and sort of treat each layer, but all together. Not sure I would do it in the same way now, but at the time it just felt right. And so I gave him a number of remedies, and especially I think the remedy that really helped was Staph aureus, interestingly. And the pain just like disappeared. His T cell count rocketed. After a few weeks, he was well enough to travel the world. He wanted to travel the world.
Wow.
And he started traveling. And then the punchline is that he got murdered in Mallorca. Yeah.
I wonder what this guy did in his past life.
I know. I mean, and I hadn't given him cipalinum. That was probably the missing remedy, maybe.
Yeah.
But
I don't think that would have stopped the murder, though.
He'd gone out in style. I mean, he was able to travel the world, and he was well enough, and felt great, and his energy had come back. So it was it was a success in that sense.
That's amazing. And, one remedy we've never talked about on this podcast is the remedy made from AIDS. And I have actually embarrassingly never prescribed this. I almost prescribed a little while ago, but the patient refused to take the remedy, even though I explained there's none of the actual AIDS in there. But I wonder, Jonathan, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the remedy AIDS? And did you ever use that in any of your prescriptions for your AIDS clients?
Well, then I'm equally embarrassed, because I know I have not actually used the AIDS nosode. At least I've not used it where I've had a kind of definite result, put it that way. I'm not a real expert on the AIDS nosode, but I do know that it's has to do with feeling like the boundaries are very, very tenuous. And so boundaries, either people get abused regularly, or they are receptive to lots of infections, but there's a kind of like they're porous. There's a porosity, and that seems to be the sort of the main, and that's a lot of a feeling of sort of abuse, like a heavily abused person. Well, maybe I should use it more. Yeah.
Roger Savage helped me on a case of a boy who had steroid withdrawal symptoms. And I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's actually a disease. It's got its own clinical name of steroid withdrawal. It's also called red skin or something like that. And this poor boy looked like he was a leper. Like his skin was just so terrible. He couldn't even wear any clothes. He was just like sitting in a bathtub all day long, sitting there all naked. And Roger said to use the AIDS nosode, but I couldn't. But the client just wouldn't take it. But I thought that.
Well, I tell you another remedy that you could use for that situation. So where the skin has become, you mean, really thin and papery.
And also there was just sores everywhere. His whole body was covered in sores.
Yeah, lecithin is the remedy.
Ah, okay. I've only used that.
I can't remember where I read that, but that is the remedy for withdrawal of steroids, where the steroids have really affected the skin in that way. So
thank you so much. Yeah. That is amazing. I'm always learning new remedies on this podcast myself. People always messaging saying, I learned this and this. I'm like, well, I learned even more than you. So I love it. And can you tell us maybe a little bit about the book, AIDS, the Homeopathic Challenge? So what will people find in this book?
Yeah, I wanted to make it like, it's not like a textbook or a manual, but more just my experiences, really, good and bad. And some of my insights I'd garnered from working with the HIV and AIDS thing. So some of the psychological things about patients who are, in that situation, and also some of the pitfalls of practicing, because I'm now burnt out like 2 or 3 times while I was, when you're working and all day long you've got people coming in who think they're going to die. It's quite a big deal, or at least it was at the beginning. I mean, I toughened up. That's one thing it taught me, to toughen up a lot. But there's the pitfalls of practice, and then there's a lot of materia medica that I learned, and also strategies. I mean, I was doing a lot of layer prescribing and multiple remedy prescribing, so I wanted to sort of introduce that, even though at the time, I mean, it was very taboo. I mean, I had great difficulty with getting my Society of Homeopaths registration, and I mean, I had a terrible review of the book in the Society Journal. I mean, it was not just critical. It was kind of critical of me as a person. I mean, it was really sort of like saying that I wasn't fit to practice, kind of thing.
Yet here you are, luckily, 35 years later.
35 years later,
prove them wrong.
Well, but then Jan Scholten wrote me a nice review, so it sort of balanced it out. So hopefully it's a good read, actually. I mean, there's some nice cases in there, showing how I was practicing. And it is like a historical document in a way. It's not what I would probably do now in some ways. I think I've changed my thinking and trying to change my way. But at the time, it was just what I was doing. And it kind of worked in many cases. So,
Well, maybe we can talk about that next, if you don't mind, is how has your methodology and your prescribing and things changed over the past 3 decades?
Yeah. So I think when I was at college, we were taught, really a relatively small number of remedies and a sort of a classical approach. And I remember coming out of college, and one of my fellow students had started practicing in this kind of multi-layered way, and she was getting fantastic results. And so that sort of opened my mind to, really kind of finding my own way of prescribing, not just going by book learning, but really kind of feeling my way and finding what works. So at first I started using or experimenting with this sort of multi-layered approach, giving more than one remedy at a time. But that partly, I think, was due to the fact that the materia medica was relatively undeveloped then. There were polycrests, and then there were small remedies. And what I realized eventually was there are no small remedies. There are just remedies. And then I think the great discovery was Jan Scholten's first book, the Homeopathy and the Minerals. And I remember reading that, and that again, like, oh my God, that is just fantastic. His use of the periodic table and understanding the concept of the periodic table and applying that to understand remedies that had never been proved or proven. And I found that just so useful. And I think then that there was then a huge push to discover more and more materia medica. And then that meant I found that one remedy could often be all you needed, rather than having to sort of combine and sort of do a lot of jiggery-pokery, that one remedy could fit the whole case, or it could be simpler and maybe a little more elegant as well. So Scholten has been a huge influence on my prescribing. First of all, with the periodic table, and then the development of the plant theory. And the plant theory is, I don't know whether you've.
I've watched your lecture on CHE, and I know you teach.
Cool.
Teach a lot of that as well. You're an excellent lecturer.
Thank you. I found. I think it's quite interesting because at the same time, Sankaran was developing the sensation method. And it's funny because in a sense, they are both similar. That Scholten's use of numbers to kind of represent like a cataloging the plant kingdom through sort of numbered, where the numbers actually have are not just theoretical, they have a sort of feeling behind them. So that if we think of the phases, for example, in the plant theory, you've got 1 to 7. And whereas 1 it's all about the phases describe how people fit into a group or don't fit into a group of people, of workers, of school children, or whatever the group is. And whereas phase one is like you're right on the outside of the group, you're just coming into the group, you're newbie, you're naive. And then 2 is kind of feeling you're in the group, but you're feeling vulnerable and you sort of hide yourself away a bit. And then 3, you're kind of starting to explore. And they have a kind of, so you develop a sort of feeling that you can then perceive. When you're seeing a patient, you can actually see those kind of feelings coming to life. I don't know if that makes sense. They have there is a kind of sensation aspect to the numbers. And I think that's what I found was the most, if you just think of it as a kind of mathematical concept, then it's very dry and it can just bamboozle you. But if you sort of tie it into the sort of the feelings that you have, so phase 4 is very in the middle, but a bit rigid and sort of very upright, whereas phase 5 is kind of pushing, they're enthusiastic, they want more from life, they're pushing on. So you get this feeling of, so when I see a patient, I'm going, where is the energy in this patient? Are they sort of kind of hiding away, or are they pushing forwards? Are they, what are they trying to do? What is their energy sort of telling me? And that I found really, really helpful and really useful.
That's amazing. And I always, everything is energy at the end of the day. And sometimes a person walks into your clinic and you just kind of get a vibe from them. And sometimes it can be a good vibe or a bad vibe. And then one of the things I'm always asking, like at the beginning, I'll be like, oh, this person is so grumpy, or this person looks like they don't even want to be there. Why did they even come and see me? And then I have to stop myself and I'll be like, no, actually tune into how you're feeling or the energy that you're getting from this person. Why are they feeling that way? And then finding their remedy. But it's easy just for our, normal day-to-day thinking, oh, this person's grumpy. But actually, if you just kind of step back a little bit, why are they giving off this energy? And also, why am I feeling that energy from them?
Yes, exactly.
So, it's best job in the world.
That is so right. I mean, especially when someone is talking a lot, they've got a lot of symptoms, a lot of their life, and it's all coming out, and you can get lost in the words.
Yes.
It's like a forest of words. And one of the things I've learned to do is to feel comfortable with being confused.
Yes. I always say, if you want to be a homeopath, you have to be very comfortable with being very uncomfortable.
Absolutely. You have to not know what the hell is going on here.
Yeah.
It's like, what is this? What is the remedy? Who knows? I really don't know what is going on with this patient. And I try and understand before I find a remedy, like what is really going on here, I suppose. And what is the energy and what am I feeling here? And especially if they're talking a lot, I'll take a step back and just sort of let the words wash over me and perhaps not pay too much, but pay more attention to the energy that's coming with those words. And I find that, there are cases which are very logical cases, which are, you just go, there are a number of symptoms, you repertorize them and bingo, the remedy pops out, There are those kind of cases. But then there are other cases where it's almost like the meanings are a little bit hidden or a little bit masked, or there's a lot of noise around it where you have to kind of tune into the themes and more of the sort of the feeling of the case. So,
absolutely.
It's important to know which kind of case you're dealing with, I think. There's the ones that are kind of more simple and just straightforward, often acute cases, actually, although sometimes not. Sometimes you've got to then see where the acute is actually just the top layer of a chronic condition underneath. And then there's the more kind of more wacky cases, maybe even, or I get a feeling sometimes I don't know what this remedy is, So I'm talking a lot now. Is that okay?
Keep going.
I'm on a roll here. I'm on a roll.
I love it. This is the best podcast. Just let it out.
So, I would get to like at a certain point, I'd go where I would see people proving all these kind of weird remedies, like, these different fishes or these different insects, and I'd go, look, or even, energy, vacuum and sort of stuff like that.
Black hole.
I'd go, black hole. And I go, no. I'd just draw the line. I go, no, that's ridiculous. Come on now. That, when it doesn't, it's not useful. This is all just head stuff. Actually, studying with Lou Klein was a great opener for me, because I realized about allowing yourself to think outside the box. allowing yourself to go wherever you felt you needed to go without drawing lines around it there's a kind of to block you from. So I started using some quite weird remedies as we talked about, dog shit.
Yeah, let's go there.
Heroin.
I've got that on my list. Let's go there. Talk to us about dog shit.
Dog shit. So, that was one of those remedies. I thought, oh, come on. No, this is ridiculous. You cannot use dog shit as a remedy. But it really does. I think it's a very useful remedy for people who, I used it with a guy that said, my dad just treated me like a piece of shit. I mean, that was his whole thing. I was treated like shit. It's a bit like laccaninum, but more extreme, where people have been they've had their spirit crushed. You think about stepping on dog shit, you kind of crush the shit in the pavement. Think about that, they've had their spirit crushed. And they almost like they lose sense of any self-esteem whatsoever. It's that kind of thing. So it is a useful remedy for that certain cases. Maybe it doesn't. I mean, I used it to open a case. It doesn't fit the whole case, but it did work, and it definitely lifted this guy from feeling like shit to having more self-esteem. So it was a good remedy.
Did you tell him that what it was that you prescribed? Or did you just use the Latin name Excretinum caninum?
I told him. So yeah, it's fine. And he was. In fact, I used it with another woman, and I mean, in fact, both people were okay. I was surprised. I thought that you might think, come on, this is give me my money back.
Yeah. You're taking the piss.
Taking the shit. Yeah, whatever. But anyway. I had another case. I was treating this was a lovely case of a fibromyalgia. So this one was in a lot of pain, but she was on so many different drugs. And I think probably, a lot of people might have thought, I don't want to treat this case because, especially when they're on so many drugs, heavy drugs, she'd been taking 50 dihydrocodeines every day. She was addicted to dihydrocodeine. And I started off with things like carcinosin and folliculinum, actually, but that did sort of limited amount. But then the remedy that really opened things up was heroin, because she had the addiction thing was going on, and she kept talking about this addictive voice in her head that almost like it was like the devil. It's like telling her, "Don't go for the exercise because just lay back," like the devil inside her, and. So she had this addictive side, and then she mentioned that her aunt had been addicted to heroin. And heroin has a kind of a hero or a heroine. There's a braveness about them. So you always feel like they had this terrible life, but they're being brave, and they challenge themselves to get out of it. And there's always this kind of the Narcotics Anonymous, and they go through this, this thing to sort of get over what they've been through. And there's this braveness, this heroic side to them. And this is what she had. And heroin was really, really useful. And the pain went down dramatically from heroin.
Amazing.
Then I gave her dihydrocodeine, which then improved the pain even more. That was great. That really, really improved the pain. And then the remedy I came to, so I was asking her about, she said, I feel like I should be taller, like I'm sort of curled up, like I can't stretch, and I can't sort of, I said, well, just use your imagination. Tell me what that looks like. She said, well, I picked up a woodlouse in the kitchen the other day, and the way woodlice are they sort of curl up when you
I think we call them a slater over here.
That's right. They've got funny names. We call them woodlouse. And she said, that's what I feel like. I thought, oh, how interesting. So I found that actually in the repertory, the remedy is oniscus, it's called. That's woodlouse. That's the Latin. It's had approving. And in the repertory, one of the symptoms was loves heavy metal and punk music.
That's in the repertory.
Yes. And I said to this woman, because she's the most mild, timid person you could ever imagine, very quietly spoken. I said, this sounds a bit of a random question. I said, but how do you feel about punk music or heavy metal? Oh, I love that. She said, my dad was addicted to punk music. I love it. She said, every time before I do my exercises, I put my headphones on and I crank up the volume to full of punk music. It was a gift. And I gave her a meniscus.
Gift. Yeah.
And she did really, really well on meniscus. So like it enabled her to stretch properly, whereas before it was very painful.
Wow.
She was able to stretch properly. So, and then we moved on to some other remedies, but kind of, it's a difficult case, but now she's got to the point where the pain is negligible. I mean, it's very, very mild. I mean, she still has a little bit, but she's still on quite a few drugs, but she's happy in where she is. I would say probably there's some more development to be done, but I felt like, at the moment, that's where she wants to be. And maybe she'll come back at some point in the future. But yeah, we got her to where she wanted to be. So
I sometimes think that our clients must think that we're clairvoyant or something like that, because, sometimes when you suspect a certain remedy and then, while my client's busy talking, I'll quickly look it up in the Materia Medica and see if there's like an unusual symptom. So you'll ask them like a confirmatory question, do you like punk music?
That's right. And they how do you know that?
Yeah, how do you?
Exactly. And it's true. And I always, if something pops into my mind, rather than dismissing it, I will often ask it. I'll just go, well, just go there, see where it leads, and it's often very profitable. So.
Absolutely. In our international homeopathic Facebook group where you're in, you always blow my mind with the interesting cases that you put on there. And, you've had cases there of aspartame used for a Parkinson's case, and I love the remedy
Paracanthus.
Yes, that one.
Yeah, the dory.
Yeah, the dory fish in Finding Nemo, and seal's milk. I mean, I always wonder who went to go find that seal to milk it to make the remedy from.
I know.
Actually, I was wondering who was the homeopath that got the heroin to make the remedy from.
Well, that was Janet Snowden did that proving, actually. Give her credit for that.
Did anyone ask her how she obtained it?
No, but I suppose it's, any pharmacy could probably get hold of it, I guess.
Yeah, probably.
Seal's milk, that's a really interesting case. This woman had problems in relationships. She basically was abused when she was very young. And I think since then she didn't trust anyone. And she used to have dreams of dark water and like tsunamis but a lot of like deep water. And she was always ready to make a way to the door for the relationship, to leave the relationship, because she, anytime there was a problem came up with the partner, she would run for the exit, and she felt she was never sort of trust someone. And I suppose I put two and two together. So the thing with the sort of the dark water, and she had a fear of sharks. So this kind of like feeling like something could come up and grab you and drag you down into the water. And then there was something a bit, seals are very cute. There's a cuteness about them. And there was something kind of cute about her. And there was stuff around mothering, and so there's the milk aspect, the sort of lack aspect was there. So I just kind of put two and two together and came to seal's milk, and wow, it totally changed her life. I mean, she was she was so much better in relationships. She was able to sort of trust and to not run for the door when some problem came up. And it really, really transformed her life. She said, I feel happy. I've never felt like this happy before, like that sort of thing. So it was really great. So worth thinking outside the box sometimes.
Yeah. And how on earth did you come to prescribe the homeopathic remedy made from aspartame for Parkinson's?
Well, first of all, Lou Klein had done a lot of work on aspartame, and for autism, actually. I think he had an autism case where he used aspartame. The woman that I treated with Parkinson's talked about, she had some metabolic disease, which called trimethylamminuria or something. I can't remember it's something like that. It's where the body produces very stinky fish-smelling sweat. It's like a metabolic problem with the body where it's producing this kind of weird sweat that smells like fish. And that kind of got me thinking there's something metabolic. And then, I don't know, something in my mind was making a connection with phenylalanine. And then I found out that aspartame and phenylalanine are kind of close. One is a precursor of the other. And then I saw that it actually is useful in the kind of Parkinson's type symptoms. And so that's how I got to it. Gave it, and it's been really, really good. In fact, I've switched now to aspartic acid. So I've just experimented. I was using aspartame, and then she kind of aggravated a little bit on that. So I switched to aspartic acid, which is the sort of more purer form, I suppose, of aspartame. And so far she's doing really well. She's not perfect, but she's, a lot of all the numbness, the tingling, the walking is much better. She feels happier in herself. She's sleeping better. She's still under treatment, but yeah, she seems to be doing well.
Amazing. Now, for the homeopaths listening, Jonathan has, if you want to learn more about these interesting remedies of his, and you've got there's the plant series as well. Although I think that's through CHE that you do that, or do you have your own series?
Well, I did it. Yeah, I did my own webinars as well on that. So you can either get it through CHE or on my website, jonathансtallick.com. You can find all my webinars are there. They're for sale, but they're at a reasonable price.
They're incredibly well priced. They're so well priced, and you've got it's such a great variety of courses. And I know you've done Death's Head Hawk Moth has been in there as well, which is a remedy that I have used a lot the last few months. I love it. Great,
isn't it? Yes, it's a really good remedy. Really good. The butterflies and moths are really interesting.
Oh, I love them.
Yeah, I've used it a few times.
So any of the practitioners listening, if you want to do some of Jonathan's courses, go check out his website, jonathансtallick.com, and then you can just purchase them as you go, and also subscribe to his newsletter. I've been subscribed to it for quite a while, and you regularly send out emails with new courses as you add them. So that's a really nice way to either watch it live, or then you can watch the recording afterwards, which is great.
It's always
for us.
A recording.
Different time zones. Yeah. Now, Jonathan, have you got any advice for new practitioners starting out, with 35 years experience behind you? You must be doing something right. So any words of advice for the newbies out there?
I think the word that comes to my mind is just persistence, really, because, you're going to have ups and downs. I mean, there have been times, there's still times when I'm just thinking, look, I can't do this anymore. I've had a difficult patient, or sometimes you get a cluster of them, a few patients that are kind of difficult, they're not getting anywhere, something. And, sometimes you've just got to sort of just take the rough with the smooth, basically. I think you've got to be a little bit tough-skinned, actually. Homeopaths tend to be very sensitive people, and often maybe get quite emotionally involved with their patients. And I found I do my best work when I'm really not emotionally involved, when I just kind of look at it as I have fun spotting the patterns and then translating those patterns into remedies, and just making it into more of a kind of conceptual thing, rather than get too involved with people's really getting down in with them and into their emotions. I find it's just better to keep a slight distance, but that's just the way I work. I mean, everyone has their own style. Yeah, persistence, I think, and just developing probably a little bit of a tougher skin so that you can sort of weather those difficult times as well. And then just keep learning, and don't close yourself off to keep learning from other practitioners, keep reading cases, learn from your peers, just keep reading different cases, learn from everyone else. That has been just fantastic, and makes it so rich and interesting.
Absolutely. Now, Jonathan, I often end up the podcast asking people what their 3 favorite homeopathic remedies are and why. But I think for you, can I ask you 3 of the strangest remedies that our listeners probably wouldn't have heard of?
I mean, probably the dog shit is a pretty weird remedy. And it was a woodlouse, a pretty weird remedy. And so I'm not sure I can think of
No,
others,
that's fine. I just threw that in there. Yeah. But I have to tell you that my parents-in-law, who already think I'm slightly crazy, I love them to bits, I really do, but they here this evening, and I said to them, okay, guys, I'm going to go chat with a guy about remedies made from AIDS and dog shit now. I'll see you later. So I don't think I've helped my case with him, but anyway.
I've got friends, that I talk. I've sometimes are candid about using things like dog shit, and they just laugh. I mean, they just laugh at me. But then they hear, but the person got better, and then they have to think, well, maybe I need to, maybe not laugh so much. Maybe this is kind of interesting.
Check it out. Well, it's been
check
a
it out.
blast having you on. I haven't laughed that much in a little
Great,
while.
good fun.
And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And
Thank
I
you,
really
Jenny.
appreciate it. And please keep doing your webinars because they're super fun. And it's like you said,
Yes,
we have
thank
to
you so
keep on
much.
learning. And this is such a great opportunity for the homeopaths out there to get exposed to remedies they might never have thought of. And so often when I do these lectures, you can be sure that week somebody's going to walk in and you're going to need a remedy from that lecture that you've just learned about. And I don't know if you're making your mind into it or if it's the universe or if it's coincidence, but I've found that so often. And that's why I love always learning from other practitioners, because you can be sure there's going to be a client walking in that's going to need that remedy that you've just learned about.
That's absolutely true, isn't it?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been lovely to meet you.
See you. Bye.
The Homeopathy Hangout podcast is produced by Eugenie Kruger Homeopathy. For more information, visit eugeniekruger.com. The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not replace advice from your medical practitioner. Please read our full disclaimer in the show notes. Thank you for listening.